Baseball in America, half a century and more ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago. That's what this record is about. Today, with rockets, spaceships, men practically on the moon, it's easier to visualize the future than to remember the past. But just for an hour, forget spaceships and hydrogen bombs, forget jet planes and TV, and let yourself slip back into the long ago, into a different way of life. Baseball in America 50, 60, 70 years ago. It was a different world then. In 1899, William McKinley was President of the United States, and Teddy Roosevelt was Vice President. X-rays had just been invented. Dewey had just taken Manila, and in right field for the Cincinnati Reds was Sam Crawford. He hit .307 that year. That was about the time that some daredevils drove an automobile all the way across the United States. They left San Francisco on May 23, 1903, and arrived in New York on August 1st, 71 days later. That was also the year that Hannes Wagner hit .355, and Christy Mathewson won 30 games for the Giants. A few years later, Chief Myers became Mathewson's catcher, and Rube Marquard won 19 straight games. The Wright brothers were trying to fly an airplane, and Marconi was trying to perfect something they called radio. America and baseball, a long time ago. These men were there, playing in the big leagues. Were there many Indians in Riverside when you grew up here?
Oh, no. There used to be a rancheria down there, but they finally got pushed away to the hills.
You weren't on a reservation of any sort?
Oh, I was when I was a young fella. We lived on a reservation for a time. Went to school on the reservation when I was young. Went to school there. In fact, I went east and availed myself of a college education at Dartmouth College. However, I didn't finish, which is one of the regrets of my life. You know, Dartmouth is just like the Giants. Once a giant, always a giant. And this is quoted from Chaucer. He said, once a Dartmouth, always a Dartmouth. So you never lose that affection for the school, regardless. If you just get in there and get a cup of coffee, they instill that spirit into you.
How did you get started to play baseball?
I got started playing ball because I liked it. That's all. I was just going to school. And that way, and of course, when I got out of school, I started playing baseball professionally.
How did you get signed up with your first organized team? Who signed you?
Well, I don't know. We never had any scouts in those days or anything. You're thinking modern. There's nothing like that. You just push yourself in. If you like to play ball and they saw you, they took you, that's all. And you proved yourself. See, I started playing ball when Dewey took Manila.
In 1898?
Yeah. There was no scouts when I started out playing ball. The game was not a well thought of game like it is today. Today it's mostly college men in there and everything, and they're admitted to the first-class hotels and all that sort of thing. We were just a second-class citizens, weren't even worse. Well, in the early days, yes, you weren't admitted to hotels, that is first-class hotels. Why, baseball was a rowdy game. It was just like the sailors in Boston. In the park, in the commons, no sailors allowed. We were in that class.
Were you a pretty tough bunch?
Well, you had to have guts or you wouldn't stay there. That's all there was to that, even on your own ball team.
You were always a catcher, by the way, weren't you?
Always a catcher, yeah.
How did they treat you, a rookie coming up?
Well, you couldn't, I don't like to say this, but in those days, when I was young, I was a foreigner. I didn't belong. I was an Indian. In those days, those tough babies, they didn't consider a youngster at all. I remember when I broke in with the Harrisburg Club, they had a whole lot of old timers on there. The pitcher was pitching out there. Gee, I wish I could think of his name, this old distracted globe of mine, pardon my Shakespeare. This pitcher was a spitball pitcher. And the first ball he pitched, he hit me right in the belly with it. Because I'd called for a fastball, he threw me a spitter. He crossed me up all the way. And there I was, a young fellow behind the bat being crossed up. So I didn't give him any signs at all. Because I was on my own then, I could catch him. I wasn't expecting anything. He says, "What's the matter? You're not giving any signs." I says, "What's the use?" I says, "You go ahead and pitch." And I caught him. And when it came time to bat, I had no bat. We used to carry a bat in those days, and I got a bat bag now yet. So it came my turn to bat, and a couple of men on bases too. And I went to pick up a bat, and some guy says, "Hey, Busher, drop that bat." So I looked at the manager and I says, I haven't got any bat, I said, just like that. You know, he went over there and grabbed the bat and handed it to me. I had no choice of bat or anything. But we went up to bat. Well, the first ball was kind of high and inside at the old head. Kind of timed me down, you know. I figured it. I figured it'd be like that. It's tough. However, on the next pitch, I hit one into the Susquehanna River.
I started in the Canadian League, 1899. That's an odd thing. Canadian League, you know, you have to get out of the country to start. In the Canadian League, that was just a little, I guess about 6-club league over there, you know. Folded up about July, I guess. Well, then I went to Columbus. Columbus in what they call the Western League. I was in there July, August, September till September. And they sold me to Cincinnati in that fall, 1899. Those were rough and tough days, you know, in those days. Things were different.
What was different?
Everything was different. You didn't have the hotels and the traveling, you know, 2 guys sleeping in an upper, you know, and things like that. Yeah. So it was altogether different, but I don't know. He didn't get the money. Of course, he didn't. A dollar was a dollar in those days. Those leagues were struggling, you know. They had a hard time getting along. They didn't pay much money. Canadian League only got about $65
a month.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the season.
Board.
And board.
Ball players in those days were considered pretty rough, you know. And it like. A lot of, if you had the time, you could go back and reminisce, you know, go back and think of the old days. I can remember Detroit Club, that was in 1903, well, even before that, you know, in Cincinnati. They You go in a dining room in a good hotel, pretty as good as you can get. But they always shoved you way down in the corner somewhere, you know. There's the ball, comes the ball player, down in the corner. Well, did you ever hear of Kid Elberfield?
Sure.
With the Yankees up on the hilltop? Well, he was in Detroit. He played in Detroit with Kid Gleason. Tough little guy, too. But they was in some hotel somewhere, shoved us down, way down in the corner. And they had, those days, they had all tile floors, you know, little square tiles, you know. And they're down there and couldn't get any waiters, you know. Well, this is true, you know. He said, I'll get you some waiters, fellas. So he took one of the plates. He sailed it up in the air, you know, and it'd come down in a million pieces, you know, hit that cement, tile floor, you know, spattered. He had 4 or 5 waiters around there in no time. But that's the kind of things that happen, you know, those things. They stand out in your memory, you know. So you see, you go way back in the tough days.
Now take for instance Matheson. Yeah, I don't think he ever walked a man that is from being wild, that is no control. I don't believe he ever walked a man in his life. The only time he ever walked anybody was expedience. Pitching too fine to him, you know, not letting him get a good ball. But there was never a time that he couldn't throw that ball over the plate.
Who called the game, Matheson or you?
I call it. But if you don't feel right about it, why, he shakes his head.
Did he often shake you off?
No. Manny never shook me off.
What was he like as a person?
Wonderful character. Lovely character. Gentleman in every way. If you made an error or anything behind him or anything of that sort, he'd come and pat you on the back and say, you know, we'd love to play for him. We'd break our necks for that guy.
I understood he was a very, very good checker player.
Oh, you see, that's what made him a great pitcher. His wonderful retentive memory. Anytime you hit a ball hard off of him, you never got another one there. Those fellas back there, they use their head in baseball a whole lot.
It's psychological, not in the mind.
A lot of baseball's in the mind, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know how much baseball's in the mind of these these present-day players. I don't know, they're always looking around for help. You don't know what to do.
You think they were smarter in your day?
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Ball players get traded from one team to another so much. How did it feel the first time you got traded?
Well, that was a funny thing. We were playing in Chicago and we go to St. Louis. And Sam Rice was just entered the Hall of Fame. He was my roommate. And so we get in St. Louis about 8 o'clock in the morning, have breakfast. They have a zoo where we stopped in this hotel not too far away. So I thought I'd go over to the zoo. So So I was over there, they had bears over there, and I used to give them peanuts and things like that, and monkeys. And so I come back to the hotel, and Sam is sitting out waiting for me. He said, "You're in the wrong hotel." I didn't get it. He said, "I tell you, you're in the wrong hotel." I said, "What do you mean I'm in the wrong hotel?" He said, "Well, you'll find out. I smell the mice somehow." And he said, "Well, do you know that they traded you to St. Louis Browns?" I said, "No." "Did they really?" "Well, it broke my heart."
Were you superstitious?
Not too much. Not
Why-
too much.
why-
Only thing is I wouldn't walk under a ladder, that's all.
What about on the ball field?
No, not so much. I've seen a lot of them superstitious. Even butterflies flying across the field. A big red butterfly, you've seen those.
Sure.
They're called monarchs. Or a white butterfly, you've seen white butterflies. They mean something. A red one meant something and a white one meant something. And the manager would look out and he'd say, "Boy, oh boy, oh boy, there goes a red one." You know, things like that. They believed that stuff. You know, they really believed it. A fellow named Bill Armour used to manage Cleveland. Bill Armour, and he came to Detroit after. Very superstitious, you know. The bats, we used to lay the bats out, you know, and if the one was laid a little bit crooked, you know, he'd holler at the bat boy, "Hey, take that hickey out of there," you know. All little things like that. And he'd go nuts if he saw a cross-eyed boy.
Really?
Oh, gee. We used to try to find a cross-eyed boy for a bat boy. I said, "Gee, there's a bat boy." Bill would look at him. Oh God, he'd have an expression on him. You think he was going to die. You know? Get rid of him. Get rid of him. Leave him stay here, but I don't keep him out. Keep him out of my sight. I don't want to see him. Oh boy, what a superstitious guy. Gee. And we'd laugh, you know. We'd get a kick out of that if we could just find a cross-eyed bad boy. Oh boy.
The true story is going to be as I'm going to tell you now. The Giants were playing in St. Louis, in the old National League Park there, and in those days we didn't have a dugout. We had a bench under an awning about halfway between the grandstand and the foul line. We were having batting practice, the Giants were, and out of the grandstand walks an individual, tall, lanky, in a dark suit with a black derby hat on, and he walked across the grass from the grandstand to the bench, and he said, "I'd like to talk to Mr. McGraw." And some of us there pointed at Mr. McGraw out, and he walked over to Mr. McGraw, and he said, "Mr. McGraw," he says, "my name is Charles Victory Faust." And he said, "I live over here in Kansas, and a few weeks ago I went to a fortune teller who told me that if I would join the New York Giants and pitch for them, that they would win the pennant." Well, Mr. McGraw looked at him, and being superstitious as most ball players were and are, he said, "Well," he said, "that's interesting." He said, "Take off your coat," and he said, "Here's a glove and the ball, and I'll get a catcher's mitt and I'll warm you up and see what you have." And so they got up in front of the bench, and they tossed a few balls back and forth, and And Charlie Faust said, well, I better give you my signals. So they got their heads together, and he gave him 5 or 6 signals, and McGraw would give one signal, and Charlie would wind up, and his wind-up was like a windmill. Both arms went around in circles for quite a little while before he let go of the ball. Well, every different sign that McGraw gave, the ball came up just the same. There was no difference in them whatever. And there was no speed. It was probably enough to break a pane of glass, but that was about all. And so McGraw finally threw the glove away, and he caught him barehanded, because he said, well, to himself, this guy's a nut. He said, I'm going to have a little fun with him. And he said, how about your hitting? Can you hit? Oh, he says, pretty well. Well, he says, we're having batting practice. Get a bat and go up there. And he said, I want to see you run, so run it out. Word was passed around to the fellas that were shagging out in the infield. He dribbled one down to short. He juggled it a minute, and Charlie was turning first, and they slid him into second, and they slid him into third, and they slid him into home in his best Sunday clothes. Well, that night we left for Chicago, and when we got down to the train and got into our car, who was in the Pullman car, our private car, except Charles Victory Faust? Everybody looked around in amazement, and McGraw said, well, he said, we're taking Charlie along to help us win the pennant. So, believe it or not, every day from that day on, Charles Victory Faust was in uniform, and he warmed up sincerely to pitch that game. He thought he was going to pitch that particular game. Every day this happened. This was 1911, and Charlie Faust, as I said, warmed up every day to pitch and never pitched a game. He wasn't signed to a contract, but John J. McGraw gave him all the money that was necessary for him to keep himself neat. He went to the barbershop almost every day for a massage and a haircut. He had plenty of money to tip the waiters in the small amounts that we tipped in those days. And we did win the pennant. The spring came around the next year, and Charles Victory Faust was in the training camp. He was very sincere. He really believed that he was a pitcher. He warmed up every day in 1912. And again, we won the pennant in 1912. In 1913, he was again in the spring training camp. He warmed up every day to pitch. And during that season, he became such a drawing card with the fans who would clamor for McGraw to put him in to pitch. So finally one day, against Cincinnati in New York, they clamored so hard and so loudly for McGraw to put him in to pitch that McGraw did put him in to pitch. And he pitched one full inning without being to a contract in the National League, and he didn't have enough to hit. They didn't score on him. One of those nothing ball pitchers, you know. It was Charlie Faust's turn to come to bat when 3 outs were made. And the Cincinnati team stayed in the field for the 4th out to let Charlie come to bat. And the same thing happened then that happened the first time that Charlie ever came on the field in St. Louis in his Sunday clothes. They slid him into first, second, third, and home. He was such a drawing card at this stage that a theatrical firm gave him a contract on Broadway in one of those 6-a-day shows, you know, starting in the afternoon, going through the evening. And he got $400 a week for it. He dressed in the uniform. He imitated Ty Cobb and Christy Mathis and Hannes Wagner in a very silly way, of course, but seriously as far as Charlie was concerned. And the fans loved it, and they went to see Charlie on the stage. He was gone 4 days, and we lost 4 ball games. The 5th day, Charlie showed up at the Polo Grounds in the dressing room, and we all said to Charlie, well, Charlie, what are you doing here? How about your theatrical contract? Oh, he said, fellas, I got to pitch today. He says, you fellas need me. So he got out and warmed up with this windmill warm-up that he had that just tickled the fans, and we won. And we won the pennant again. That fall, I joined a group of big leaguers, and we made a barnstorming trip starting in Chicago and going through the Northwest and down the coast and over to Honolulu. And in Seattle, who came down to the hotel to see me but Charlie Faust? And Charlie Faust said to me, he said, Snow, he said, I'm not very well, but he said, I think if you would prevail on Mr. McGraw to send me to Hot Springs a month before spring training, that I could get into shape and help you win another pennant. But unfortunately, that never came to pass because Charlie Faust died that winter and we did not win the pennant the next year.
Cleveland, Ohio, I bummed my way to Waterloo, Iowa. 5 nights, days, and everything on freight trains and everything. So finally, when I got to Waterloo, Iowa, the station master, he says, "What are you doing here? Come on, get out of here." And I says, "No," I says, "I'm reporting to the Waterloo Ball Club." And he looked at me, he says, "Did you ever wash your face?" I said, "No." I says, "I've been riding for 5 days and 5 nights." I says, "I'm anxious to get here." I says, "Where do the ball players hang around?" And he said, the smoke shop down the street about a half a mile. So I went down there and I got in the place there, and the fellas that owned the ball team owned the smoke shop. Their name were the Strong Brothers. So I got in there, and one of the brothers was back of the counter, and he says, "What are you doing in here? Who are you and what do you want?" I says, "Well, I got a telegram from Mr. Frisbee, the manager of this team, to report, and if I make good, I'll get a contract." He said, "Did you ever take a bath?" I did take a bath, but I said, "I bummed my way here." So Frisbee happened to come in, and I was introduced to him. And I said, "I've received your telegram, but I didn't have any money to come first class or anything like that." I said, "I had to bum my way. And you said if I make good, why, you will reimburse me." He says, "Keokuk is here tomorrow and we'll pitch you." I said, "You don't want me to pitch tomorrow?" I says, "After what I've gone through." He says, "Tomorrow or never." So I says to Frisbee, I says, "Could I have $5 so I can get a clean shirt or something?" He says, "After the ball game tomorrow."
Oh, boy.
So the next day, I warmed up, and oh, I felt terrible. But I had it in my mind that I'm going to show him that I could make good. I went out and I pitched, and I beat him 6-1. And that night I thought, sure, by winning a ball game, I could get $10 advance on my salary. So I asked him, I says, "Mr. Frisbee," I says, "I showed you that I could deliver the goods." "Oh," he says, "Keokuk's in last place." He says, "Wait, Oskaloosa comes here. They're in second place. They're a tough team. And if he can beat them, then we'll talk." I says, "Can I get any advance money, $10 on my contract?" He says, "You haven't got a contract yet." I said, "All right." So I didn't say anything to any of them. That night, I went down to the railroad station. Same baggage man was there, and he says, "What are you doing down here?" Well, I said, "I'm going back to Cleveland, Ohio." I says, "I want to know what time a train comes by here." He says, "How are you going?" I said, "I'm going to try to get back of the engine." Oh, he says, "This train comes in at 1 o'clock. and the engine unhooks, and he goes down to the water tower. And when that engine comes back and hooks up, in the meantime, I'll talk to the baggage man. And when the engine is hooked up, you'll get in back there, and when it pulls out about 5 miles, he'll open the baggage door and he'll let you in. So that all happened, and when we were 5 miles out of town, he opened the door and let me in, and he says, the baggage master was telling me about you. So he says, I'll tell you, when we get to Chicago, when we get into the yards, this train slows up so that you're able to get off. But don't hesitate. When you get off that train, you beat it out of the yard, because if you don't, there's so many detectives. They'll just grab you and throw you in jail. So I did. When we got to the yards, I got out of there and I got on the street. And about a block from where I got off, there was a fire engine house. And they were all to the fire. It was empty. They had a big bellied iron stove. And it was warm, and I just sat in there for a little while. I went to sleep. And the fire department came back, and they shook me, and they did everything to get me. Said, "Bum, you get out of here." And I said, "I'm no bum, I'm a ball player." "You a ball player? Where'd you ever play?" And I told them, Cleveland, around the Sandlot. Oh, and they started kidding me about a ball player and everything. They said, "Where you going?" I said, "Back to Cleveland." "You got any money?" I says, "No." So they got a little pool up of $4 or $5, and he says, "On your way, wherever you can get something to eat, stop and get something to eat." I told him before I left, I says, "Now when I come back in the big league, I'm coming out to visit you." So, in 1908, I went to Indianapolis. My first year with Indianapolis in 1908, I broke all world's records. I pitched 48 full games, won 28 of them, had the strikeout records and the least base on ball during the season and the least hits and everything like that. So I was sold to the New York Giants for $11,000. And at that time, that was the highest price that ever was paid for a ball player.
$11,000.
$11,000. And when the team got to Chicago, I went out to that firehouse, and the only one was there that was when I first got there was the lieutenant. I walked up to him and I says, "Lieutenant," I said, "do you remember me?" "Never saw you before in my life." He said, "I don't know who you are." "Well," I said, "remember a couple of years ago you caught me sleeping back of that stove there?" "Oh," he says, "you the fella that's the ball player?" I says, "Yeah." "Remember?" I said, "My name was Marquardt, Richard Marquardt." He says, "Yes, what are you doing here?" "Why," I said, "I'm in the big league. I told you when I get in the big league I was coming out." He says, "Who are you with?" I said, "I'm with the New York Giants." And boy, when the Giants would come to Chicago, he'd have all the kids in the neighborhood, everybody around there. And I'd come out there and sit in front there and talk to them and things like that. I did that for years. Every trip we got to Chicago, I'd go out and see him.
We were playing in Chicago the first year I was with the team in 1906. Come the ninth inning, score was 2-1 in favor of the White Sox. A man on first, and the pitcher turned to bat. So Bill Armour, who was our manager at that time, asked Schaefer if he was all right. Schaefer'd been out of the game for about a month, and he asked Schaefer if it was all right to go up and hit. So Schaefer says, "Yeah, sure." So Schaefer walked over in front of the grandstand. He took off his cap and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are now looking at Herman Schaer, better known as Herman the Great."
The greatest pinch hitter in the world. He says, I'm going up there and I'm going to hit the ball in that left field bleachers and win this ball game. So I finally turned around and he says, thank you. He walked up to the plate, and of course they all give him the raspberry, you know. He never hit over 2 or 3 home runs in his life. So the second ball pitch, he did just exactly what he said he was going to do. He hit it in the left field bleachers. Well, boy, oh boy, you ought to have seen him. He stood at the plate, you know, until he saw the ball going into the bleachers, and he tore down to first as hard as he could run, and he slid into first head first. And he pulled off his cap, and he says, Schaefer leads at the quarter. And he tore down to second and slid into second. He says, Schaefer leads at the half. And the same at third, and the same at the plate. When he slid into the plate, he turned around, he says, Schaefer wins by a nose. And he walked over in front of the grandstand and took off his cap, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, he says, I want to thank you for your attention. And laugh away. Of course, I was laughing my head out of the damn fool. Schaefer was always funny to me anyhow. And well, you know, it was one of the funniest things I think that I ever saw, and it's so unusual today. You know, they think a guy was crazy if he did that. But in those days, you know, you could pull stuff like that, and the crowd enjoyed it. They would enjoy it today, but of course they wouldn't like to pull anything like that. And of course, that made Schaefer, you know, winning the ball game that way. But we went back to Detroit the next day and played Cleveland. And of course, Schaefer goes back into the game. Schaefer came up the first time, and of course, everybody in the ground said, hooray, Schaefer, you know, for winning the game the day before. Give him a great send-off. So he took 3 swings and struck out. And the second time he came up to bat, of course, it was still a hooray Schaefer, but not quite as much of an ovation as he got the first time. He struck out again. Third time he came up to bat, no commotion at all, no ovation. So we come to the fourth time at bat. I think it was the 9th inning. Anyhow, Schaefer didn't want to get up to bat again. I looked at Schaefer, started laughing. Schaefer had to get up the 4th time, you see, after striking out 3 times. And of course the crowd then, take the bum out. You know, that's the baseball crowd, you know. Take him out, take the bum out.
They didn't used to hit so many home runs in your day, did they? At least nothing like today.
You see, back in up until 21, they had a dead ball. Well, you couldn't hit that ball. Only the way you get a home run is as an outfielder fall down. But you couldn't hit that ball. I caught how many a ball would be mashed on one side. Come out there and be jumping, and you look at it flat on one side. See?
Is that right?
Yeah. Of course, they weren't wrap tight. A ball was fouled off, come back. Why, if it had a rough place on it, all the umpire done, take his finger like that and push it down and throw it back out there. And if it had a sliver, he'd pull it off, you know, and take his finger and give it back to the pitcher. He never threw any balls out.
We used to play one whole game with the ball if it stayed in the park.
Yeah.
Lopsided and black and everything else.
You saw some mighty good pitching, didn't you?
Walter Johnson.
Were you playing the day Walter Johnson pitched his first major league game?
I beat him. Not being egotistical, I hit a home run off him that first day. I think we beat him 3-2.
First game he ever pitched in a big
American League. You heard of Quintillion, Joe Quintillion?
Sure.
You know Joe? You know of him. He was managing Washington at the time. I think that was 1907. We were after the pennant then. That was our first pennant. But Joe was always kidding. He was a kidder, you know. Joe was a nice guy. He was an umpire too later. Joe told us, he says, as we come off the bench, and says, well, boys, I got a big apple knocker who's going to pitch against you guys today. You want to watch out for him. He's got a swift. He's plenty fast. You know, he told us that. And then here's Walter. He's just a string of a kid, you know, tall, lanky. Walter had just reported, you know, from Idaho or somewhere. Didn't have a curve, but he had that fastball. That's all he pitched.
Just fastballs.
Just so, yeah. He didn't need any curve. He reminded me of these, you've ever seen these pitching machines?
Yeah.
Compressed air things? Well, I batted against those things, and it's a peculiar thing. The batters were afraid of that machine because they could gear that thing up so that ball, boy, it was like a bullet, you know. Well, that's the kind of a ball that Walter Johnson pitched. He had a swish on it. It swished.
When you were batting, how close could you see, or did you watch the ball until it actually hit the bat?
I used to think I could see the ball hit the bat. That is really true. I believed it in my own mind that I saw that ball hit that bat.
You really watched that ball to the last?
Right on up to my bat.
How close could you see, or did you watch the ball to the time it hit the bat?
Well, I try to watch it as long as I could, you know. You watch it and try to see it, but I don't believe you really see it hit because it's traveling with tremendous speed. You see, how can you see it? You see, you can't, if I put my hand like that, you can't even see my hand, so how am I going to see the bat hit the ball? You see, you watch the ball till you...
Some players swear that they can see that bat and that ball meet.
Maybe they can. If they can, you take the fastest camera. Pretty hard to have that, and you got the camera right on it. It's pretty hard to distinguish if when the ball is hitting the bat. It's a blur, see. So this is a blur. See, yeah. I mean, I move my finger. I'm sure that you couldn't see an object hit that thing. You're watching the ball hit the bat. See, I don't believe it's possible to see the ball hit the bat. I try to watch the bat hit it. Try to watch the bat hit the ball. But when it comes in contact with it, that bat is traveling too fast. Of course, I played days. I didn't play nights, see. And I could see the spin of the ball. You know, I could tell when the ball is halfway up, there's going to be a curve or
you could see.
A spitball, absolutely, a knuckleball, absolutely. I could see the spin of the ball. You could see the ball revolving. See, the ball is revolving. You see the way it's revolving. I could.
Did you know Chief Alexis?
I didn't know him. He was from Old Town, Maine. I never knew him.
Chief Bender, did you know?
Oh, yes. I know Charlie quite well.
The Indian had a position of a minority group in those days, didn't he?
Oh, it's that way yet. It's that way. We're still a minority group. Nowadays, you can't ridicule an Irishman on the radio. You can't ridicule a Jew. And you can't ridicule a Negro. But they can kill us every night on the radio. That's one reason I don't look at anything but a ball game. I carry the news on the television. I like the news and the ball games and the news. And after the news is, why, then comes the killing. Those things I don't like to talk about. I know them. I see them. In the old things, we had a saying, if anything was honest and upright, we'd say it is on the square. They've even turned that word around. Square deal is no more you're square. Where do they get that stuff anyhow?
When I was a youngster, all I wanted to do was play ball. And my father was against playing baseball. He was the chief engineer of the city of Cleveland. And I would go out and play with the kids, play ball, pitch, and everything like that. And come home at night, and he'd say, "Where were you?" I says, "Playing ball." And he says, "Now listen, if you have it in your mind that you want to become a professional ball player, get that out. Because I want you to grow up and get an education and go to college. And when you have an education, you can go out and get a job. And if you haven't got an education, you're no good. And a ball player will never be any good." And I told him, when I grow up, I said, "I'm going to be a ball player." And I said, "You're going to be proud of me." My grandfather, my father's father, he liked baseball and everything. And he told my dad, he says, "Now listen, when you were a youngster, I wanted you to be something. I wanted you to be a stone cutter, same as I did. Same as I did when I came here from the old country." He says, "No, but you wanted to be an engineer. So you became an engineer. Richard's going to be a ball player." And he's so determined that nothing is going to stop him. So in 1908, I went to Indianapolis. And when I was ready to leave, my dad says, "Now listen, I don't want to see you become a ball player, but you've got your mind made up that you're going to be one. Now I'm going to tell you, when you cross that threshold to go out and become a ball player, don't come back." I said, "You don't mean that?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Well, I'm going, and you're going to be proud of me." I never saw my dad until, about 15 years.
That long?
That long. One day, the bat boy came in, and he said to me, he says,
Didn't your father try to get in touch with you all this time?
No, he was stubborn, so was I. So, the bat boy came in, he says, "Rube," he says, "there's an elderly man outside, and he wants to see you." He says, "Is your father from Cleveland?" I said, "My father wouldn't go across the street to see me, but you go out and get his autograph book and bring it in, and I'll autograph it for him." So instead of bringing the book, he brought in my dad, and we were both glad to see one another. I said, "When did you come in?" He says, "Before the game started." I said, "Where were you sitting?" He said, "I was sitting, you know the man that has that funny thing around his face?" I says, "You mean the mask?" He says, "Yes. And this thing around his chest and the shin, and these things around his shin?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I was halfway down to number 1 where the man stands. You know when the fellow hits the ball and they run down to the number 1 man?" I says, "The first baseman?" He says, "I don't know what they call him." He says, "I was sitting right in the middle." I says, "Why didn't you tell me you were there?" He says, "I was afraid to make you nervous." I said, "There were 35,000 people there. They didn't make me nervous." Well, I kept him there for 2 weeks, and he had a grand time, and he went home. So the photographers and the newspapermen wanted to know the address of my dad in Cleveland, and I told them. So they went out to Cleveland, got his picture and everything, and asked him a lot of questions. And so finally, they said, "Did you ever play ball when you were a youngster?" "Oh," he says, "I used to play ball, but," he says, "I never became famous like my son Richard." "Well, are you proud of him?" He says, "Why shouldn't I be? He's a great ball player."